Let the record reflect that no other business was discussed other than what was contained on the agenda. Also, let the record reflect that at 8:29 PM, we are reconvening into open session. All right, so we are moving on to vote on some stuff. I
Yes,
believe.
personal consent agenda.
All right, so I'm just getting in my right spot, excuse me. Okay, sorry for the pause. All right, so 15.1, potential board action to approve the personal consent agenda. There are a plethora of people. being
Yeah, I can
hired.
just read real quick. Jack Aylman and Cyrus Martin as teachers at Finley Junior High. Kadria Sala, paraprofessional at Ridge Central. Clarice Rain Taylor, paraprofessional at Ridge Lawn. Tayana Tate, contractual paraprofessional from Solient. Araceli Magana Guerrero, float custodian. Araceli Magana Guerrero as the evening custodian now. Regal Harris, substitute custodian. Irene Mohammed, lunch hostess float. Malik El Haj, long-term sub for Emily DeMarco. And then we also have David Stonis added to our substitute teacher list.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
Mrs. Grove.
Aye.
Mr. Medina.
Aye.
Mrs. Bergen. Mrs. Lammle.
Aye.
Mrs. Schroeder. Mrs. Lebudzic
Aye.
and Mrs. Petropoulos.
Aye, 15.2, notification of resignation, no motion needed. It's just, we have Araceli Guerrero, float custodian, and that is actually a switch pending approval to being hired as the evening custodian. And Jonathan Ruiz is the evening custodian that is resigned.
Yep.
15.3, potential board action to award tenure to the following individuals. Emily DeMarco, fourth grade teacher at Ridge Central, to be retroactive from August 21st to August 21st, 2023. I'll make a motion. I'll second.
Mr. Medina.
Aye.
Mrs. Lebudzic,
Aye.
Mrs. Schroeder, Mrs. Grove, Mrs. Lammle,
Aye.
Mrs. Birkin, and Mrs. Petropoulos.
Very much aye. Okay, so 15.4, potential board action to approve an MOU with the Chicago Ridge Education Association. I'll make a motion.
Mrs. Lammle,
Aye.
Mrs. Lebudzic,
Aye.
Mrs. Grove,
Aye.
Mrs. Schroeder, Mrs. Birkin, Mr. Medina,
Aye.
and Mrs. Petropoulos.
Aye. 15.5 is the healthcare, the potential board action to approve a contract with ATC Healthcare Services for additional healthcare resources at one of the nurses. I'll make the motion. I'll second.
Mrs. Bergen, Mrs. Lammle.
Aye.
Mr. Medina, Mrs. Schroeder, Mrs. Lebudzic,
Aye.
Mrs. Grove, and Mrs. Petropoulos.
Aye. 15.6, potential board action to approve a stay bonus for the school psychologist in the amount not to exceed $3,300.
I'll make the motion.
Second.
Mrs. Lebudzic,
Aye.
Mrs. Grove,
Aye.
Mrs. Lammle,
Aye.
Mr. Medina,
Aye.
Mrs. Schroeder, Mrs. Birkin, and Mrs. Petropoulos.
Aye. 15.7, potential board action to approve the termination of employee 2024A. I'll make the motion. I'll second.
Mrs. Schroeder.
Aye.
Mrs. Birkin,
Aye.
Mr. Medina.
Aye.
Mrs. Lebudzic,
Aye.
Mrs. Lammle,
Aye.
Mrs. Grove, and Mrs. Petropoulos.
Aye. 15.8, potential board action on resolution releasing the closed session minutes and destruction of verbatim recordings 18 months and older. I'll make the motion.
Second.
Mrs. Grove,
Aye.
Mr. Medina,
Aye.
Mrs. Schroeder, Mrs. Lammle,
Aye.
Mrs. Lebudzic,
Aye.
Mrs. Bergen,
Aye.
and Mrs. Petropoulos.
Aye. 16.0, looking for a motion to adjourn. Make a motion. I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, we are adjourning at 8:00.
8:34.
Perfect.
We're meeting in the lobby. What time again?
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful